Teachers, what's the darkest thing you've seen from a student? I was working at an after-school program as a director, site manager, and one of my employees radioed me needing my immediate assistance at the playground. I raced out there. The employees pulled me aside and said that I needed to look at Lil Billy's back since it was dark outside. She couldn't tell if it was scratch marks or burns. She said she had put in time out, standing against a basketball pole, and he was trying to lean up against it but kept making weird spastic moves every time he leaned against it, so she asked to look at his back after he said it hurt. I asked Lil Billy to follow me to the nurse's office, leaving the door open. The school staff was all gone, but there are cameras everywhere, and just in case I didn't want anyone thinking I was doing something inappropriate with the kids, since I had no idea what I was about to see and or hear. It took everything in my power to not audibly gasp once I lifted the back of his shirt. I counted at least 7 belt loop bruises and 5 lash marks. I asked where he got them from, to which he replied, "My dad." I got a bad grade. This kid got beat with both ends of a belt because he got a P in conduct. I ended up asking his permission to take pictures, and I immediately called CPS. When I showed up to work the next day at 2 p.m., City and the ISD police were there. I found out, from the CPS person, that the woman listed as his mom was the dad's GF, and she knew the beatings were going on and that this apparently wasn't the first time. CPS and the city police refused to let the GF or dad see him. Good. Mom lived in a neighboring town, so they removed him immediately and sent him there. That's the last I heard of anything. Not a teacher, but I did do relative volunteer work with little kids. One of the 5th grade boys was caught grabbing random girls and trying to pull them into the supply closet and tried to kiss them. He was even caught trying to grab their butts or would out his hand on their seat as they started to sit down. When we finally got to talk to his parents, turned out his grandpa was teaching him these things. The weirdest part was when we questioned the grandpa about it, his response was, "Who cares? They are just little girls." 13-year-old crying hysterically in class, saying random adult voices are telling him to kill himself. Next day has no memory of incident, but tells me it comes in waves. Disturbing. I teach teens with emotional behavioral disorders as their primary disability and learning as a secondary. Anyways, seen lots of shit, but I'll narrow down to these 2. First one, student D was hard to connect with. He was so disconnected from his peers even. He was on the smaller side and lacked confidence. D was the head-down disengaged type that usually took a little longer to build a trusting relationship with. I just assumed this was his coping mechanism at school. One day he was gone and another student announced that it was for molesting his little sisters. It turned out there was a big bust in our area within his trailer park where children were just being passed around between convicted sex offenders and used to create porn. The reason truth unfolded was because his little sister's teacher noticed that she had bled through her clothing in her 1st grade class. His little sister admitted that he had been abusing her for longer than she can remember. The most upsetting detail I remember is that his mother was allowing it to happen in exchange for childcare and money. He ended up in a juvenile detention center before his court date. Because he had an IEP, I was still responsible for providing instruction to him. What that meant was I would send a packet of math worksheets to his tutor at the center. Every couple weeks they would get sent back to me for grading. The first time I received his work there was doodles and symbols. The next time, he started to write phrases. By the end of the semester, he wrote me pleas to help him all over his pages. Later on I found out he was being victimized simultaneously by an older man he met on the bus. D is now married and has a child of his own. Second, I had a brother and sister, K+M, in class together who had a unique bond. They had not spent most of their years growing up together as they were in and out of foster cares or group homes. At this point in time, they were living with an aunt, but it mostly seemed like they were house hopping between family members. Their attendance was poor and it was hard to keep track of their current residence. It wasn't very unusual in this district because there's a lot of mobility, especially around this population. Halfway through the year we got a new female student, J. Her mother had gone to prison, so she moved to the area to live with family members. Jay made a positive first impression with peers despite being quiet and more reserved. She had anxiety and depression, so when she stopped attending after the first week no one seemed alarmed. It was such a big life change, so most teachers presumed she bailed on school. It was at this time K+M were thriving at school. They were seeming more positive and taking better care of themselves. Come to find out, they invited Jay over one weekend and decided to beat and drug her in an apartment where they had been staying unsupervised. They kept her high in a closet and prostituted her for income. That then explained why they were wearing new clothes and fresh haircuts. When I was a student teacher, I taught briefly at a school with very old school approach to teaching. Desks in rows, nothing is shared, no group collaboration, students don't engage, only listen. The demographic that went to this school took their children's education very seriously, and students had very strict parents. On one of the first days meeting my class of grade 3 students, I had the students wash their hands before doing an activity. I was helping some students roll up their sleeves while they were washing. I got to the last student, and my mentor teacher tells me to stop, which caught me by surprise. She pulled me over and told me that particular student had cuts and bruises all the way up his arm from alleged domestic abuse. The relevant government agencies were already involved in the case. She noticed it when she realized he always flinched when she came near his arms. The fact that he never gave high fives, or that he only ever wore long-sleeve shirts to school. It was one of those sobering moments where you realize there is still evil in this world. I'm not a teacher, but I did see this one kid sitting right at the front of the class beating his meat to the teacher while she was explaining something to us. She eventually saw it, screamed with shock and ran out of the class. Had a kindergartner smash a glass measuring cup and stabbed himself in the arm to the point that blood was everywhere, all while repeatedly crying, "Please just let me die. I just want to die." Had to sit in my car and cry for about 30 minutes before driving home that day. I've got two. I had a student casually tell me about how he pulled the eyes out of his rabbit's head. He explained how there was blood everywhere. This was my first day working as a supply teacher at that school, and my first conversation with the student. I later brought it up to support staff and they were shocked he mentioned it to me. Apparently he killed his rabbit because his mom loved it more than she loved him. The boy was now in foster care, as his mother was a drug addict. He shared a lot of really dark stuff with me that day. Another one, more sad than dark, was at a different school. Students had to write their address for an assignment, but this 4th grade girl didn't know hers. Another student asked me, "Do you know where the so-and-so motel is? She lives there." Really broke my heart, as this girl was so young and innocent, and didn't really understand how unfortunate her living situation was, as she proudly googled the motel and found her address. Really low-income part of town. The teacher next to me in one portable classroom arrived to find a used condom tied to the doorknob. They did catch the kid that placed it there. It shocked everyone. My first year teaching was, like everyone says, the worst year. The first day of school, I'm getting to know the kids by asking them random questions, and I asked this one boy what he wants to be when he grows up, and he replies with, "Doesn't matter, I'm going to end up in prison like my parents." We were okay. From there things got progressively worse. He was hearing voices and always threatening to hurt other staff or students. He was hitting his head on walls or windows when frustrated. He came back from spring break and told me the voices told him to kill a cat he found. By the end of the year he was sexually assaulting girls at school. Our school had a selective mute kid that graduated last year. Kids were calling him Fish Boy. It turns out he was buying fish and killing them in various ways on Instagram based on people's requests in the comments. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school my senior year, a guy in my English class asked me out. I wasn't into him, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I said that I wasn't really looking to date anyone. Every day for the rest of the semester he sat behind me in class and would describe in vivid detail the ways he was going to murder me. One example of this was him cutting my legs off and dragging me behind his car. Someone told me that he waited for me to leave school one day, but I always stayed several hours late at school for speech and debate practice and theatre rehearsal. I'm not a teacher, but in junior high we had a special ed kid and everyone got along with him, and the two troublemakers we had gave him a knife and told him to hurt himself with it. They got suspended or expelled. Darkest thing, I was an intervention specialist. Had a student who was a mysterious pooper. For a while he would poop on the floor in the bathroom and no one knew who was doing it. I didn't see it, but I heard it. I used to work at a shelter for at-risk girls aged 8-18, mainly truancy or runaway cases, but some were taken from homes of abuse, drugs, sex trafficking, etc. We housed and looked after roughly 20 girls at a time when we were at full capacity. Many of them had a lot of mental and emotional issues. One of our youngest girls at the time, around age 9, was talking to an older girl, around 13. Teen was nonchalantly talking about how she was raped as a young girl before she came to the shelter. Next thing I knew, at least 10 other girls who had overheard the conversation started talking about how old they were when they were raped. Some rattled off multiple ages and times when it occurred, just causally. It was chilling to hear so many young girls tell their tales. Saw a couple of kids walking down the hallway. One ends up behind another, for no reason at all, punches him in the head as hard as he can. I immediately call him over and ask why the crap he did it. He immediately acts like he has no idea what I'm talking about. If I hadn't seen him do it, I'd probably have believed it. He was so convincing. I remind him there are cameras, and then he admits he did it just because he wanted to. No remorse, no reason, no regret. I had multiple other incidents like that with him through the year. I worked in a low-income, high-needs school then and tried my best not to judge my students, but it was weird to honestly believe this 14-year-old was going to seriously injure or kill someone one day.